Thank you, Nabil. I would like to immediately invite the director of the Asia Pacific Institute for Broadcasting Development, which is the AIBD, the host and the organizer of this webinar, to give a welcome address. And Ms. Philomena Nyaselinga, please take the virtual webinar room and extend your welcome to the participants. Thank you.
So greetings to everybody. Thank you for joining us here at this very important webinar that is taking place everywhere. I think we have friends for joining us from the US, over from New Zealand, Malaysia, and all over Asia Pacific, as well as Africa. So we're indeed honored today to have so many experts join us and in this wonderful webinar. And of course, as you know, that AIBD is an intergovernmental international body, which is reaching out to more than 100 members globally. So we are also joined today by colleagues from ITU, and also Chetan Sharma Consultation, the man himself is here. And we're going to talk about, of course, the latest mobile technology that everyone's waiting for. And I think what is the impact of 5G on broadcasting? So this is what broadcasters in Asia Pacific as well as globally are looking at. And so we have two presenters in a panel discussing this. And then we have also another panel of discussion moderated by Dr. Amal Punjiheva. And I think Dr. Amal is not new to this field. And even as I speak, I know that today we're joined by so many people, producers, broadcasting engineers, right, telecommunication and spectrum experts, regulators. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And a little bit about Dr. Amal Punjiheva. Well, he's a broadcast engineering consultant and fellow of IET UK and senior member of IEEE USA, and also a distinguished lecturer and who's well recognized in New Zealand and also internationally. I think he's a big name everywhere, and I'm sure that we're going to have a really very interesting session today. So without much ado, I'd also like to request participants to be a little proactive and put your questions on the Q&A. And right after everything, we will be opening the Zoom for more questions from you. So we'll be happy to take this. And this is also being streamed live on Facebook. So today we have more than, I think right now we have 63, but almost 170 people have registered for this webinar globally. So without much ado, Dr. Amal, it's to you, and let's begin this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director. And then I also extend a very, very warm welcome to each one of you who joined this webinar today. And so what I earlier mentioned was that we have a good lineup of speakers and panelists, and then the program is two presenters, and then at the end we take about 40 minutes with those five panelists discussing a number of important questions and topics around those presentations and the questions that you will be presenting, and at the end we will summarize. So without taking much time, leaving more time for presenters and for the later discussion, I will move on to quickly tell you what are the webinar goals. Actually, I set here 4 main goals where we would like to inform participants about the 5G, because that's what you indicated while you are registering for this webinar. This 5G is standardized by 3GPP. That's a standard making body which does this standardization for the mobile technologies. And then we will be looking also at the evolution of 5G. And then today's presentation is quite unique from Mr. Chetan Sharma, who will be introduced very soon by me, and talk about capabilities, benefits, and also challenges. I have highlighted that one. And then we will be looking at impact on a wide range of industries, including broadcasting and how 5G can be adopted for greater public good. And we have run a poll, which I will take up sometimes later. Let me straight away introduce Mr. Chetan Sharma. He's one of the leading strategist. That's the important part of it in the mobile industry. So he advised various top 5G and other high-tech organizations in US about the innovation and then the time to introduce those technologies. So, so I will now invite Mr. Chetan Sharma to start this presentation.
So thank you, Dr. Amal, and thank you, Philo and AIBD for inviting me to talk about 5G. Kind of the things that I want to talk about was at a high level in terms of what 5G means to the decade, in terms of what innovation and disruption might come. And so since we are talking a longer time period, it's important to understand what other technology cycles are happening at the same time. And this is not a new phenomena. It is, has been happening for decades, if not hundreds of years. When new technologies come into the ecosystem, they change the shape of global trade, global GDP, and so on and so forth. And so I'll focus on a few things that I'll go through in a minute. But the idea is to really understand the context in which 5G is evolving. And once we understand that context, then it's easy to figure out what 5G can do to various industries going forward. So that you have a context of where I'm coming from. I've been doing wireless stuff since 1G days as a young engineer in 1G AMPS days, and now I'm working on 5G. Our company focuses on strategy, and we work across the value chain around the world with top mobile operators, infrastructure providers, and pretty much everybody in the value chain, from chipset manufacturers to governments around the world. We've been thinking about this for some time in terms of how these technologies shape ecosystems. So we've been writing about it in books and papers, but more specifically, with respect to 5G, our research has focused on economics of 5G, maturity models and competition in 5G, guide for policymakers, and the real impact that 5G can have on various industries and markets. So to kind of set the stage, I wanted to spend some time on three key elements or three key theses that we have put forth. One is connected intelligence, synchronous S-curves, and the fourth wave. Then talk about 5G status, what's happening around the world, what the roadmap looks like with respect to features and functionality, and what to expect with respect to 5G, what are executives who are working on 5G, what they think will happen in 2021, 22, and beyond. And then we'll get into setting kind of the 5G media, what it means for media, what elements of 5G spec are important for media, and what can we expect in the days ahead. So a bit of context about long waves. It is something that we have been studying for almost a decade, but it's not a new thing for economists. Economists have been studying it for over 100 years, starting from Kondatev and then Schumter, and most recently by Carlota Perez, who is a Venezuelan economist, who has studied how technology waves come and impact, and the new waves start. And these waves are generally 30 to 40 year cycles that happen over time. And that has been true for the last 250 years. If you study how various waves have come and impacted, you will see the pattern. And so we kind of built on that thesis of long waves and called the existing wave of technologies as connected intelligence in a paper that was published in 2014. And since then, we have evolved the thesis, evolved the theory, and also done some quantitative work around what connected intelligence means. In a gist, it is essentially your software and sensors that shape the global landscape. And the last wave, we are at kind of the tapering off of that wave, which was essentially the information age and telecommunications, which started about 40 to 50 years ago. And if you notice the cycles, you see Industrial Revolution, Age of Steam and Railways, and so on and so forth. They generally have started in a given country and then spread around the world. And so clearly the leading country benefits from its greatest, and then it spreads across the world. With connected intelligence, while it might have, some of the sparks might have started half a decade back in the US, it's really spreading worldwide at the same pace. So you see what's happening in China, Korea, Japan, US, India, Europe, and so on and so forth. You see that there is just tremendous amount of growth, and we'll get into the specifics of it in a little bit. And so what that connected intelligence does, or what each cycle does, is it expands the GDP or the output by a significant factor. And we think that connected intelligence is going to do the same thing for this cycle for at least the next 30 years. And our thesis is that close to $1,000 trillion will be generated in the next 10 years. And that connected intelligence will play a critical role in shaping that global output. And we are already seeing that companies who are involved in software, companies who are involved in sensors, and a mix of them are the ones really shaping the global economy. And so it helps me for sure, but others as well, to really understand where we're going. Once you understand what are the levers, you can understand how they get played and how the ecosystem is going to develop. And so if you look at the connected intelligence stack, it's fairly simple. You see the objects, thinking objects, which are essentially sensors. We clearly use smartphones, which are sensors. But then you have the connectivity layer, which has been LTE up to this point. The intelligence layer, which was, there was a lot of data there, but was not really used very intelligently. But as AI has come into picture, and the intelligence layer is becoming its own force. Then you have trust, which is privacy and security. And then the industries are built, meaning applications and services are built on top. And so we are today focused on connectivity layer, which is 5G, and how it impacts the media industry. And that's something we had touched upon in our paper with Ericsson, which looked at 5G as a platform for innovation in various industries, and media being one of the dominant industries. So the disruption thesis is for any cycle is that when you have new digital tools that are introduced, namely LTE, you have smartphones, you have cloud, now 5G, AI, robotics, blockchain, and so on and so forth. You have these new digital tools that come into play, which also have their own new business models as to how you introduce these digital tools in the ecosystem and into the economy. And it's the combination of the two that really shapes and transforms the various industries. Good examples, Uber, Airbnb, and so on and so forth, which really came out of nowhere and transformed their respective industries. If you step back and see what is happening at a macro level, you see a number of economies taking shape. And each of them are multi-trillion-dollar economies with respect to mobile, internet, cloud, now edge internet, AI, and so on and so forth. And they intersect with each other in phenomenal ways. And it is really the intersection of these trends that shapes and creates new companies that scale to the point of global disruption. As we go forward, we have also been shaped by the current pandemic. While we waited and absorbed the shock of the pandemic in the early days, really we are in beyond calibration and now into the new future age, meaning we are trying to figure out the assumptions that were pre-pandemic, how they have been shaped and how much the digital acceleration has taken place over the last 12 months. And that's true with commerce, much more e-commerce than there was ever before. The use of video for education and for work has changed. The travel patterns have changed. The data consumption on networks have changed, and so on and so forth. And so as we go forward, the experience the world has had during the pandemic will clearly shape how the investments are made and how new technologies come into the ecosystem. We have to keep that in mind as well. The next concept I want to talk about is synchronous S-curves. And so pretty much everybody is familiar with what S-curves are. You go through a cycle of any product, early adoption, growth, tapering off, and we move on to the new cycle. And that has been true for the last 100 years in one way or another. And if you look at these S-curve cycles for the last 100 years, you see how telephone and automobile and radio and dishwashers and microwave and computer came into being. And obviously the cycle has accelerated tremendously with each decade. It used to take 30, 40 years for something to settle. Now it's taking only a few years. Cell phones really started shaping the global economy 30 years ago, but now they are everywhere. Same is with internet, computers. And as we look forward, we really have to understand, is it just the S-curve or is there something else going on at this time? And I propose that there is this phenomenon of synchronous S-curves that's really shaping various ecosystems, especially the tech ecosystem. And that's the simultaneous S-curves that influence each other's growth patterns. And that's important to understand. And so if you look at some of the patterns that took place in the internet era, you saw that internet and computer kind of grew simultaneously. And each curve really pulled the other one up. And that's true pretty much for every country. As the population of computers grew, the internet access grew. Obviously, there are a lot of places where still don't have computers and or the internet. But in general, most countries follow the same patterns, that the internet and computers grew. So that was our first visibility into the synchronous S-curves, meaning two really big phenomena taking place at the same time. As we got into kind of the next cycle after the post-internet cycle, which is the mobile cycle, really dominated by LTE, smartphones, and clouds, there were three major curves that were happening at the same time. And if you look at the two, LTE and smartphone, you see Korea, you see India, and then you see the US. Kind of the same patterns emerge. Obviously, the shape and the slope will differ in each country, but largely the same pattern. And one pulls the other. And that pulling effect we call the Cateration Effect, meaning it, instead of going at a shallow slope, it becomes a much steeper slope because of tetration or simultaneous S-curves. And the result of that is you get disruption. You get disruption like what happened, say, in the US taxi industry, where the taxi revenues collapsed in a matter of months. And so, Uber went from almost zero revenue in 2011 to majority of the revenue within 5 years. And so we see that disruption taking place in every geography, Europe, Asia, South America, and Africa. It just comes in different forms, depending on the economy, depending on what the situation is with policy, what the situation with players in that ecosystem, and so on and so forth. But the fundamental aspect is you had LTE, you had smartphones, and you had the cloud. The three really combined to give Uber its wings. And so it's a critical phenomenon to understand, because what that teaches us might happen with 5G as well. So as we get into this connected intelligence cycle, as you can see, a number of technologies are growing simultaneously, some at faster pace than others. But if you look at what's happening with 5G, it's really intersecting with edge internet, a phenomena where you pull content and pull processing as close to the consumer, as close to the device that's taking place. You have robotics, you have blockchain, AR has been there for some time, but VR and mixed reality and XR and holograms are entering into the ecosystem. Then you have autonomous systems, you have AI and ML, and you have quantum computing. Obviously, something like quantum computing is still nascent, but others are becoming more mature as we go along. And so all of these technologies will play a role, and 5G's role is in the access layer, along with fiber and other means. The final notion that I wanted to introduce is fourth wave. So fourth wave tries to understand how the revenue models and the revenue curves shift in the mobile industry. And so this is a thesis we put forth, almost a decade ago, and have been tracking ever since. And we had proposed that before these actually happened, that in almost all countries, the voice revenue will grow and plateau and come down. And same thing will happen to messaging, and same thing will happen to data. And at that time, it was not a popular decision because things were still growing pretty rapidly, both with data and voice and messaging. But we had studied how voice curves and messaging curves had kind of grown in the past 10 years. And so we made some projections that all these curves will decline. And as such, you have to have the fourth wave. And without the fourth wave, the economies and the ecosystems and the operators will suffer. And unless they made investments in fourth wave and play a significant role, their revenues will decline. And most of what we had said in 2012 have come true in one shape or form. And so the fourth wave has its implications. It has impacted how operators think about revenue generation, how they think about 5G, how they think about future revenues, and how Wall Street really measures them. It's no longer just pure subscribers, it's also how much revenue they are generating from other elements in the ecosystem. And so you see forward-thinking operators like Docomo or Verizon or Vodafone investing really heavily in digital services, or what we call digital lifestyle services of the fourth wave. So that's kind of the backdrop of how these technology cycles, whether they are a 30-40-year cycle like connected intelligence, or there are cycles like 5G that's a decade-long cycle, or things like fourth wave that shapes the revenue in the ecosystem, are likely to progress in the coming decade. So let's talk about 5G status. And so some of you, if you're an engineer, you're probably familiar with a lot of the technical details around 5G, what it can do, but I'll just go over them just to have everybody on the same page. Right now, it's really driven in a number of countries by marketing rather than actual deployment. Deployments are happening at a rapid pace in China, in the US, in Japan, and Korea, and some pockets elsewhere around the world. But in general, there has been more marketing noise than previous generation. It's also a clear churn management tool for the operators, meaning that if you have 5G, but your competition doesn't, then you're likely to churn customers from them because consumers view 5G is better than 4G. It also provides a lot of capacity relief for the operators. Video is roughly 60 to 70, in some countries, 80% of the traffic. And so you have to figure out ways to provide relief to the network, especially in countries which don't have enough spectrum for mobile services. But key capabilities are around, it lowers the cost per gigabyte, which is critical. The spectrum efficiency is much higher. The peak data rates, throughputs is much higher than LTE, depending on the spectrum band you use. And we'll get into the bands in a minute. The latency is much lower, which allows you to do both on the consumer side and the enterprise side new applications, such as gaming. XR, VR gaming can be done when you have sub 20 millisecond latency. Then you can run multiple generations of technologies in the same band. You can run 4G, 5G with something called DSS, dynamic spectrum support. And then the density of support for connection is incredibly high with 5G. That was not with LTE. And so you can have many, the network won't get bogged down by an order of magnitude or several order of magnitude connection requests. And as such, people are thinking about new applications and services that were not possible before with LTE, like VR streaming for sure, AR gaming that cannot be done efficiently with LTE. People are talking about autonomous vehicles. The bandwidth for uploads and entertainment is different than edge computing, and we'll talk about edge in a little bit as well. But edge is critical to how we think about the internet as a whole. Because if everybody is just going to be streaming ultra high definition videos from the cloud, the internet will collapse. It just cannot support it. And so we need a new internet architecture, which is the edge architecture, which is kind of independent of what GE you are using, but it helps 5G in how content more efficiently moves around and more cost effectively moves around. And so here you see the various bands. 5G can operate in all sorts of different bands. Different countries have different policies in terms of how they're releasing the spectrum. But the three critical bands are the low band, generally 600 to 700 megahertz. Then you have mid-band spectrum available. In the US is 2.5, but generally around 3.5 in most countries. And mid-band is the workhorse of 5G, meaning that's where the bulk of the traffic will go for most of the countries, most of the operators. And then you have the high band, 24, 28, 37, 40 gigahertz, which provides you enormous bandwidth, but obviously shorter distance. And so you can do ultra high gigabit speed, and latency, obviously low latency, but it has to be very focused and very surgical deployment to provide that connectivity. And so some operators are looking at that high band deployment as a way to introduce internet services, broadcast services, where they can stream ultra high definition content to end devices. And we'll have to see how that pans out, but there are a lot of people have ambitions that the high bands will serve new application and services that mobile operators were not able to do before. The roadmap, so kind of the three pillars of 5G as put forth by ITU are obviously enhanced broadband. I think the bread and butter for the industry for some time in the early days is still going to be mobile broadband. And instead of 30 to 50 megabits per second, you're looking at 100 to 500 megabits per second if you're in mid-band, and up to going anywhere from few kind of high megabits per second to gigabits per second if you have higher frequency available. And then really important one is ultra reliable low latency communications, which is very important for cloud gaming, very good for edge computing, very good for industrial applications like manufacturing or robotics, whether they're in the home or on a plant. And then massive machine type communications where you can support millions of sensors in a city or in a plant or in a very focused geographical area. And so all those are quite important. And so I think as Dr. Amal had mentioned, 3GPP drives the standardization process. And so we go through releases, release 15, 16, that's where we are. And then industry is looking at release 17. And so there are different features that the participants pick to really standardize on. And they come to the market after the standard is frozen and products are built. And so if you go through the 16 release time cycle, the products are already out in the marketplace. And from a media point of view, it's really streaming capability because of high bandwidth that is relevant. And obviously there are other things like satellite access to 5G and so on and so forth that are important. But a lot of the broadcast elements come into 17, release 17, where you look at multicast broadcast capability within the standard. And some of the release items have been pushed because of the pandemic, but industry hopes that they can catch up and probably do sooner than listed here. So one of the I think fairly exciting and a new and novel thing that's coming to fore is VR or mixed reality, or some people call it XR, and in different forms. Clearly, if you might have used the headset, Oculus, or from other providers, you see that it provides a very different user experience. Obviously, the problem is that you have to keep it charged, and the content is limited. It's still a bit expensive, and it's a bit bulky. Not everybody, it's not very conducive to just pick it in your pocket and leave. So it's not a smartphone factor yet. But a number of companies are working on glasses, which are XR enabled, that you can just put in your pocket and leave. And you can have both AR or VR experiences within the glasses. People are working on contact lenses that can give you the VR experience as well. And so it's quite an exciting space that is developing pretty rapidly. And that's where a lot of innovation is going to take place, how to miniaturize a lot of these electronics to put them in the glasses. How do you do computing between the smartphone and these glasses and the edge and the cloud and the base station and so on and so forth. And so we are all kind of figuring that out as we speak. But that's something to keep an eye on in the next few months as new products get released in the marketplace. So the factors that determine the deployment curve or what might happen in a specific country is really dependent on a number of things. Number one is the policy. How fast is the government releasing the spectrum for 5G deployment? And some countries have done a better job than others. Some of it has been delayed because of the pandemic. But literally every government is moving as fast as they can to release spectrum, definitely mid-band spectrum, but also high-band spectrum. Some people are also releasing dedicated spectrum for some vertical industries. And at the end of the day, it comes down to economics. With each cycle, it's about the economics, what factors you are focused on. And while there's a lot of optimism about 5G, there are also a lot of questions about how the revenue model is going to work, what the competitive dynamics are going to be, will millimeter wave scale in deployments. And some of the early capabilities of 5G are also available in LTE Advanced. And so some of the operators are holding back on deploying 5G in a given country. And then others are really focused on deploying fiber as much as possible, and the combination of Wi-Fi and fiber and complementing it with cellular technologies, you can essentially reach kind of the same goal. Because some of that was shown during the pandemic, where the traffic in some countries moved from cellular to fiber and Wi-Fi. But there are a number of factors, and each country is different. But in general, if you look at what has happened so far, you see China out of the gates in terms of deployment of 5G, and a number of subs as the highest in the world. If you look at Korea, it has the highest penetration of 5G subs. More than half of their traffic is on 5G now. They're probably the most advanced in the consumer applications and data consumption patterns. The data consumption is already 2.5 to 3 times what was in LTE. And it's coming more from video as well as new forms of content like VR and AR streaming and games. And then US probably has done the best job in terms of figuring out its spectrum strategy. And so it has the most spectrum released of any country. And operators are just feverishly working on deploying and upgrading their networks to bring those devices online. And deployment is fast and furious. The competition is fast and furious amongst the 3 operators in the US right now. And so as we go forward, what do we expect from 5G? So at the end of each year, we do a pretty elaborate prediction survey where we poll the senior execs in the industry around the world and to see what they're thinking. And For 2021, 5G was at the top of the list in terms of what they see as the biggest story for the industry. And what are the significant milestones going to be for 2021, despite, but the pandemic didn't really slow things down in 5G, except probably, I think in Europe, it got pushed a bit in some countries because of the spectrum auction. India got pushed a little bit because of spectrum auction. But in general, 5G has been just making great progress all throughout 2020, despite the pandemic. So the use cases, which is something that we have been polling for the last 4 years in terms of what's the most convincing use case. And one of the use cases that have really come forth this time after the pandemic is the fixed wireless access. And that's not a surprise because people want access to internet. And sometimes your connection at home doesn't work well. And so fixed wireless has jumped in to fill that gap. But also you see enhanced multimedia and enhanced mobile broadband continue to be the key elements that people think will make money for the ecosystem. And then you have newer application areas like AR, VR, autonomous, and healthcare and IoT that are the use cases that people are working on. Now it takes time to scale those use cases, and enhanced multimedia and enhanced mobile broadband are here today. Another big question that is on everybody's mind is winners. Who are going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers? Or are there going to be any significant shifts in the ecosystem, how the money is made? Because that's what really determines the competition in any given country and competition within the ecosystem stack. And with respect to the Lte cycle, we clearly saw the shift in control from access layer to the application layer. It happened all of a sudden, and it was not just the LTE, but it was also the app model, the app store model that Apple introduced, and then Google followed. That changed the ecosystem completely. And so mobile operators went from controlling close to 85% of the revenue share to now less than 40%. And it's not that revenue has shrunk for the operators. Mobile operators still gaining 1 to 2% revenue every year, year over year. But it's just the explosion of other players that have come into the ecosystem that have generated, just in the US alone, over $1 trillion on top of the access layers. And so taking advantage of smartphones, taking advantage of the App Store, taking advantage of the cloud infrastructure. And so we can expect similar kind of turbulence and disruption as we go into the 5G cycle. So 5G and media, why media and 5G are made for each other. Even if you look at the mid-band, which provides you capability of 200 to 500 megabits per second, depending on the spectrum you allocate, you can see new forms of applications and services coming into the place. I think VR streaming is one that is being experimented heavily to figure out how to scale that. And as I mentioned before, once it gets into the glasses, I think we can probably see the market expand faster. Right now, it's niche. Then you see cloud gaming, multiplayer gaming, especially with AR. Pokemon Go with location is going to be very popular once it's come into various markets. And then edge content streaming. So even with the mid-band, if you do edge content caching and streaming, your cost structure certainly changes. And you can do much more with content and with higher fidelity and experience for the consumer. And so we can see new forms of packages that can be offered to consumers with edge content streaming. And edge content can be in your home, it can be in your server, it can be on a base station, it can be in your car, and so on and so forth. On a high band side, you see clearly the performance jumps order of magnitude 1 to 5 gigabits. And so things like gaming arcades are coming into play, where you can go and experience, say, a Disney ride within a gaming arcade. You don't have to go to Disneyland to do that. So we are streaming, and I think holographic streaming will come into play. There are already companies who are, you can do, instead of a Zoom two-dimensional call, you can do a holographic call with your colleagues and have a much better experience in how you engage with humans. And again, even with high band edge content comes into play. From a standardization point of view, broadcast mode is still a bit away, and it remains to be seen how that will play out and how that will get built into 5G, into handsets and the network support and so on and so forth. So what did we learn from 4G cycle that can be applied to 5G? I think number one, I hope I was able to convince you that connected intelligence cycle has really started. The overall industry revenue grew 6 times, and that was mainly because we were able to build new applications and services on top of the access layer with the help of smartphones and with the help of the cloud. There's a clear sign that we are in a synchronous S-curve era, meaning there will be more than one S-curve taking place simultaneously, and how that those curves intersect with each other will really define the growth trajectory in a given country or in a given ecosystem. The revenue shifts have taken place that I explained through the 4th wave analysis. The Lte Cycle. So the reason why we had a 6x revenue growth is because the cycle created 15 times more compared to the internet era, $1 billion new revenue stream, more than $1 billion new revenue streams. And I think that's a testament to the synchronous S-curves that really accelerate the growth trajectory for companies in how they go from being 10 million to 100 million to $1 billion company. And the overall revenue ecosystem grew tremendously. From almost zero, you went to $1 trillion in the US over the course of the decade, which is pretty phenomenal. And so 5G's disruptive power is really in the acceleration of connected intelligence. I think it will continue to grow, and more sensors around us than ever before. And how we manage that from a security and privacy point of view will be a continuous challenge. I think the overall industry revenue will continue to grow. We'll go into new areas. We'll go into new industries. Digitization of various industries will continue to take place, whether it's logistics, it's mining, it's retail, and so on and so forth. You do see acceleration of S-curves faster than what we saw over the last decade. And the non-operator industry revenue will continue to grow. My expectation is that 5G cycle will generate a bigger stream of revenues than we saw with 4G. So more billion-dollar companies, more billion-dollar new revenue streams. And the 4th wave globally will continue to generate $5 trillion over the course of the cycle. And so this is kind of the strategic framework of how I think about 5G and how it might disrupt. Now you have to go layer by layer to really see what elements are available in which countries, how they're getting applied, what the policies are, what the competitive framework looks like in a given country, and really determine the trajectory of 5G and disruption in a given country or a given region. And hopefully we'll get into some of that discussion in the Q&A. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'll turn it back to Dr. Amal.
Thank you, Chetan. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Yeah, sure thing.
Right. And so let's move on to the second presentation, and then so we have Mr. Daku Ratchakaj to make a presentation. He's the senior project manager at EBU, and he will be talking about the broadcast perspective of the broadcast perspective of 5G. Are you there, Darko?
Yes, I am. Good morning. So first of all, thank you, Dr. Amal, and thank you to AIBD for the invitation. The European Broadcasting Union, I believe, is a familiar name to many people on this webinar. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, we are an association of public service media organizations, mainly in Europe, but not only. We have members in all around the world, in fact. We do many different things. And one of the things that we do for the benefit of our membership is we are looking at the different technologies, trying to establish a view, to form a view about how these technologies could benefit the operations that the members actually carry out, and could we then influence the developments so that the technologies, when they become available in the market, indeed are fit for the purpose. So we have actually done an analysis of what 5G is at present and what the prospective benefits of 5G for public service media could be. In this, we have looked at different technology aspects of the technology, but we have also looked at the broader context of regulation and the market situation in which the membership operates. So many of the things that I'm going to mention today perhaps are specific to the public service media, but I also believe that many elements are also more generally relevant for the media as an industry sector, of which public service media is only a relatively small part. So I will be speaking about the possible use of 5G in content production and in content distribution. But before I start, let's just take a very quick look at what do we know. When I say we, it's a collective we of the media industry. What have we actually found out when we looked at 5G? So the picture, the triangle that you can see is the one that comes from the ITU documentation. This is a vision of what the new future INT technology should be able to do. And we have concluded that 5G indeed is a powerful communications technology, but this is actually what it is. It's a communications technology. It is not a technology designed for media. Not specifically, it will enable a lot of media-related use cases, but perhaps there is a potential to influence that the technology developments and the deployments, so that when that technology becomes available on the market, it indeed is fit for the purpose in the media sector. What we see currently, and those are early deployments, is that this is largely 5G is largely based on consumer broadband and the telecom operators' business model. We still have an opportunity because the developments are still ongoing and the deployments, as I said, are at a very early stage. I will not dwell on technical details. You all probably have seen this. Our take on this is that those are theoretical targets. And yes, you will read in the news, you will read about different tests and trials where some of these targets have been approached by real-life technologies, but those are the targets for research and standards. They're also targets for performance of the system. What we actually need to look at is how will the networks operate? And that is quite a different question. We are not aware of a publicly agreed or say a commonly declared network performance targets. And so obviously that will depend on the network configuration, on the available spectrum, on the possibly also on the regulation around it, but largely it will also depend on what are the commercial models driving these implementations. If you are in a media sector, if you're an active partner in the media sector, chances are you will find yourself somewhere on this diagram, on this picture. So the sector, the media industry is about producing content processing content in one or another way, and then delivering it to the end user for consumption. So when I talk about media sector, I talk about the professional media production and then distribution of the professionally produced content to the large audiences. So I appreciate there are many other types of media that we haven't really studied in details. Now, in the professional media production, media sector, we believe that 5G will have impact on content creation and also on content distribution. So in those two domains, we will see the impact first. Perhaps in the long run, the whole of the media chain will change because of the impact of the advanced connectivity coming with 5G. Now, let me just give a few thoughts about the professional content production and how can 5G play a role. There are, first thing to note here is that there are many different types of production use cases. So it is not just a journalist with a smartphone. That is one use case, very, very important one. But this is just one, and from the professional production point of view, technically not very challenging. It is challenging from the cost perspective if you don't have a smartphone or a network that supports that smartphone. But from the production point of view, it is a single contribution link, or say a single audio, single video. That is rather simple. We have many other media production use cases which are much, much more demanding requirements. And all of these that I've just put a couple of things here, I have a couple of examples to illustrate, we can today enable by existing technologies. So it is not something that we desperately need 5G to be able to do. So the question is, can 5G actually help us doing it better or cheaper? Or perhaps can 5G enable us to do things we can't do with the current technologies? Yeah. So when we try to structure thinking about the professional production, it is useful to group the use cases in categories that come with the similar user requirements. And this is exactly what we have done. We have actually studied different use cases, and this is what we found out, that 5G is a very good fit to something that you might be familiar with as IP-based production workflows, alongside cloud and edge-based solutions. So it does provide acceptable compromise between flexibility and performance, as well as cost and control. But public networks, as currently being deployed by the network operators, may not be sufficient for complex production. Therefore, we look forward to see another possibility coming with 5G, and this is the possibility to use the technology to build a so-called non-public or private network. And a private network uses exactly the same technology as the mobile operator's network, but it is configured for a particular purpose. So in content production, we believe that this is going to be quite an important opportunity there. We are not the only ones. You know, private networks are being considered for many other industries, such as industrial automation, even automotive and others. So we will need both. We will need both the public networks and the private 5G networks. But in order to make it happen, we believe we ought to stay involved in the developments. So as the EBU, together with some of the members and industry partners, we are active in 3GPP. We are also active in actively engaging with the regulators, within the ITU, but also at the national and the regional level. So what we see is that 5G might come into play. It will be a solution for many use cases, but it will also need to coexist with the other technologies. So we do not see, at least not in short to medium term, any migration from the existing technologies to 5G. So we need to be mindful of that. If you're interested in that topic, I recommend one of our publications here, where we have actually done quite a thorough analysis of the topic. Now, pressing on a few words about content distribution. Again, we need to bear in mind we are talking about the professionally produced content, and we want to reach the global audience, or at least everybody within the country, if you're a national broadcaster, but perhaps potentially global. So what do you want to distribute? That's the first question. So what is the service that you want to distribute? And it is not just a stream on a live stream on a social network. It is actually a wide range of services. Still the most popular, the most significant type of media service is a linear television channel and linear television radio. So the same thing we all grew up with, we are very familiar with. But of course, there are many other forms of media that are now coming into the place. And the broadcasters, as of today, already offer large range of these services to everybody. So it's a misconception to think of linear television or linear radio as the only service. All EBU members have their online presence, their on-demand services, and many, many variants of that. The other question we ought to ask is, to what device you want to deliver your service? Is it just is it the television screen in the living room, which still remains one of the most important ones? Is it a smartphone? Is it a vehicle-based receiver? Is it a smart speaker, or perhaps some of the new devices that are coming, like virtual reality, augmented reality headsets? Or perhaps for a large broadcaster, it is all of those. So each of these perhaps presents a challenge when you want to deliver a large media on a large scale. And then finally, the third question I'd like to bring up here is, where is the user? The strongest use case for media delivery certainly is still the home reception, but it's by far not the only one. Again, a couple of examples. So when you think of each of these, it comes with a different set of challenges when you want to deliver the content. So what is the challenge? So the challenge is that you want to deliver your full range of content to, well, famous, proverbial, anytime, anywhere, on any device, in a technically but also economically viable way. And as of today, broadcasters use a number of different distribution means to achieve that. So the question that we have here is, can 5G help us to reduce the complexity and perhaps to manage the cost of distribution? And I would say technically the answer is yes. Yes, indeed, it can. But beyond the technology, beyond the technical capabilities, we ought to look at other aspects. We ought to look at things like coverage and capacity of broadcast networks. Once the networks are rolled out, I believe this will not be an issue. But as of today, perhaps in the next couple of years, it will be. It will remain to be. What about the equipment availability and user adoption? And what about the regulatory framework? Are there business models that are suitable for the distribution of public service media? Because the public service media in many countries comes with the regulatory obligations for, say, free-to-air distribution, so that the users don't pay additional charges, or perhaps there are regulation about the coverage. There is a regulation about what kind of other content you can offer with alongside public service media content. What type of advertising, yes or no, these kind of things. So all of these we need to somehow take into account when assessing the potential 5G in distribution. Again, for that topic, we have another study, and I encourage you to look at it if you're interested. So very briefly, a couple of conclusions. So we believe 5G does indeed provide opportunities, but those opportunities will only be realized under the right conditions. So the true benefits we hope to see in the coming years, but as of today, we see that the focus of 5G deployments is on consumer broadband, which is a good thing. But for a broadcaster, this is only a moderate benefit. 5G would need to either outperform the existing solutions or bring new opportunities. And possibly it will be able to do both, but we don't see that happening in a short to medium term, perhaps in the long term. I already mentioned the opportunities coming with the non-public networks. One thing I'd like to conclude with here is that these are really the early days. And if you now think of what happened with the preceding technologies, it always took a long time until the networks and the devices have actually been rolled out and the adoption reached the point where the impact could be felt. for broadcasters. And we believe it's no different with 5G. One thing we have realized quite early on is that in order to influence the developments, we ought to get organized. So just being public service media organizations such as the EBU is perhaps important, but not sufficient. So we have initiated a creation of something which is called a 5G Media Action Group. And the Media Action Group is not an EBU or not part of the EBU. It's an independent organization. It's in its own right. It has recently become a market representation partner in 3GPP, which is the 5G standards making organization. And the Media Action Group provides a framework for the whole value chain, for the stakeholders that have interest in 5G for media. We at the moment have in the organization, I think somewhere just over 40 different members, including the technology providers and network operators, as well as broadcasters and some SMEs and regulators. So a broad range. So I encourage everybody to who is interested in this particular topic to visit the website, and of course you are most welcome to join us. Now with this, thank you very much. I'll be very happy to answer questions if any.
Thank you very much, Darko, for your presentation, and we will take some of the questions once we start our panel discussion. Thank you once again. Getting up very early in the morning in Geneva. So we have Parag Naik from the Sankhya Labs in India, and he's the co-founder and the CEO of that organization, and then they've been working on software-defined radio. That's how the organization started, and now they're working a lot on what they call the 5G broadcast area. So that's one of the topics that we will be discussing with Parag. And then we also have Mr. Amir Riaz. Yeah, he's a program officer at ITU Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. And so he has been part of the ITU for quite a long time, and then active in the, especially in the area of what's called the digital network infrastructure development, and also in emergency telecom areas. And then he look after the North Pacific region here. And can we move on to Lucas Nabil? Right. So about Mrs. Thomas. Mrs. Thomas, Mrs. Thomas Lamakasas has more than 20 years of international experience, and he has been working with a number of UN bodies. Especially something I noted was that the contribution he has made to the UN Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, and also the World Economic Forums, where we recently talked a lot about the connectivity and so on. So we are looking forward to hearing from you about the connectivity, which Chetan alluded to us, which is the important part of that one. So thank you once again, all the panelists being on board. And so let's start with Chetan, because before people forget, because at the beginning you gave a very good presentation where you talk about the innovation, you talk about the S-curve, and then you gave the Uber example and showed like how, like that in that one, how there could be some disruption, and also you connected the 5G, its features, and then some of the challenges with the 5G for media. So actually this question I open up for all the panelists, but especially for you and Darko. It's about like you and you also mentioned about the pandemic time, how the broadband sort of had the strain, the limitation, and then how the public service broadcasters managed to their normal broadcasting. So my question is like, so with this, the connectivity, will that, you think with this disruption, will that still help to connect, to bridge some of the gaps in the connectivity that we are talking about today? And this is also very important because if we are talking about the broadcasting, because 5G also looking at the media side, the media delivery, broadcast delivery. So can the 5G make sure like universal access for the voice and the other data communication? Can it also assure the sort of universal availability, which is now the important part of the broadcasting, especially for the public service media? So I'll first like to hear from you, Chetan, and then we move on to Darko and to others as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So, it's each country faced the pandemic differently and the needs were quite different. So let me just talk about the US experience and what we experienced here and are experiencing right now. And so despite being an industrialized nation, it showed us that how unprepared we were for for something like what hit us with COVID. And so all of a sudden it became, the disparity between haves and have not became very clear. A lot of the kids who used to go to school for education, all of a sudden they're home without the internet. There's no school for them, right? And school cannot provide them anything quickly so that they can be online. And so the disparity became glaringly obvious, and the states and the school systems scrambled to figure out what to do. And so in the early days, in the quarter that it hit first, a lot of the students just didn't have any education for a period of weeks. And gradually, there were companies stepping up, government stepping up so that they can get the laptops, get the connectivity, the wireless connectivity to provide and capability so that they can go and log into the school and do their work and have lessons. So it also showed that wireless can definitely plug the gap. And that's where the opportunity of fixed wireless came into play, which was not a big opportunity in the US at that time because everybody was focused on mobility aspect only with 5G. But now it's a big push that you can sell 5G routers to the home and you can have connectivity, whether you're using that for the only connectivity you have in the home, or you use that for a substitute or a complementary device for enterprise connectivity. And so clearly there is this gap both from education as well as work that showed that 5G can play a role, or LTE, even LTE can play a role where you can get basic connectivity. A lot of the consumers use their hotspot capability to connect, but obviously that runs out fairly quickly. And so you need a more sustainable model where it's not that expensive to get basic connectivity. A lot of the municipalities also are creating their own private network using what's called the CBRS band, the band that government allocated as an unlicensed band where you can deploy cellular technologies. And so it's free to use. And so a lot of people are thinking about deploying private networks in schools, private network in municipalities to provide access to the people who don't have access. And so there is significant jump in awareness as well as solutions that are coming into the marketplace, at least in the US.
Yeah, so some of those, the cellular connectivity given as a fixed wireless access, was it using the 5G or using the LTE itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's in some cases it was 5G, but mostly it was LTE.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, because I like to note two key things what you mentioned, because you also mentioned about the private networks. Because this is one of the key things that 5G will have in future. Darko, you in your presentation you showed some use cases, and then one application would be like I noted there were a number of trials also done, what's called stadium casting. So that connects also with what Chetan mentioned about the niche market, where the content will be delivered to the people in the stadium using 5G, but on a mixed reality headset. But how affordable these would be, because that will definitely require expensive production, expensive gear to consume, and so how practical and how sustainable those things are as of today. You're muted.
Apologies for that. Is it better now?
Yeah,
Very good.
If
Okay,
you could speak a little bit louder, please, Darko. Thank you.
I can try. Is it intelligible?
Yeah. Now.
Very
yeah,
good. Okay, so as of today, we see experiments, and this is indeed one of the use cases that will be enabled with this massive connectivity on within a venue. And stadium is a venue. Yeah. So the commercial models around that could be different ones. It could be that you buy a ticket, and that ticket allows you to enter the venue, to participate in the event, and also to receive content that is then generated as part of the production. So that could be one model. It could be part of your premium subscription that your mobile operator gives you. It could be, I believe there are many different models, but this is one of the very new use cases that comes with, as I say, massive connectivity. We see 5G as perhaps one of the enabling technologies. We see massive deployment of Wi-Fi being perhaps another one. If you allow me, I'd like to bring up one question, or one point of view here that is not specifically linked to the venues, but more generally. I think we ought to be aware that there will always be a mixture of different technologies for pretty much everything we do. So when we talk about connectivity, we have fiber and LTE and cable and many different technologies that effectively do similar things for us.
Yeah.
So 5G will not necessarily replace all of them. So when we talk about 5G is a new technology in the mix, which makes the mix more powerful, but is not necessarily replacing the existing ones. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, surely. Yeah, because actually 5G deployment requires a good fiber network, because that's how the backhaul is made. And then if you don't have that, still it's not possible to get the signal to some of the main stations. So with that, I would like to turn to Parag, because I'm sure. Because I have read and I have listened to you many times that you have been talking about what's called 5G broadcast. And then because recently I had a sort of a conversation on LinkedIn where I saw what's called the OTT broadcast. I said the OTT cannot broadcast. So it's kind of a matched terms together, but it's kind of a name given. So it has no proper meaning. So what actually 5G broadcast is, and then I think you have been telling that that's more sort of a practical and sustainable to implement. And so what it is, and then how can you in about 2 to 3 minutes can explain to the audience, to the participants that
Absolutely, Amal, thanks for having me on this. Yeah, see, I have a slightly different view, and rather we had a separate view of what 5G is. I agree with Darko to a large extent that you have to take the horses for courses approach, right? So 5G is not going to solve all problems. We are advocating a smart pipe instead of a fat pipe. See, just throwing bits at it is not going to solve all your problems. You have to do it around smartly. So fundamentally, all these cellular networks, 5G and all, have been traditionally designed for unicast networks. Right? When you design a unicast network, the physical layers that you design, you have a different set of design constraints or design considerations rather. In a broadcast, which is not a latency sensitive network, you design it very differently. So therefore, you need to use broadcast where it is useful, right? Broadcast today so far has kind of independently grown out of of the unicast networks, right? All the while you had data and probably email on the phone until 4G, and video on, say, mostly on the TV. That's changing now. And like Darko said, it's very important that users have to watch anything anywhere that they want for their choice, right? So linear video, which is an obvious choice, right? Linear video, you could just take a live stream and upload it to a broadcast network and get it there. But on the OTT part, if you really look at it, instead of throwing around bits all around the place, instead of doing what I call the pull model, the users pulling, there is going to there's this whole architecture of the push, where Netflix just recently announced that I'm based on user preferences, we kind of push those content into the devices. Memory, the reason that's happening is because memory is cheap, right? Devices now have 256 GB and higher. Now, but then the spectrum becomes expensive. So you can't say, especially in the Western countries. I mean, in the US and Europe, things are different. In India, people are watching a whole lot of video on data plans on the phone, and that chokes all our networks out, right? That's one of the reasons why, and we have a limited spectrum there. So therefore, you have to have an intelligent way of pushing this into the device, and therefore we have some very intelligent ways of offloading video content from the core itself into into a broadcast network. That's one. So if you want to, the second point I want to make is, see, you want to get broadcast as a kind of a tool service or a toolkit into the overall 5G plane. So 5G has this concept of slices. If you look at it, a slice is a logical concept or a service that has its own set of constraints. Like there is ultra low latency part, there's a fat pipe. Likewise, broadcast is a very good candidate for being a slice in 5G. Broadcast has its own set of service requirements, has its own set of design considerations. So therefore, 5G broadcast, in our parlance, is basically getting broadcast into the 5G fold, and initially looking at probably the broadcast physical layers, like for example DVB-T2 or ATSC 3.0, they're very optimized for for doing broadcast. Like Chetan said, I think in one of his slides, a true broadcast physical layer is out there in 2023 or 2024 in 5G. So in the interim, you could take this ATSC 3.0 or the DVB-T2 and build an offload network using 5G broadcast. And the last point I want to make is the architecture that we need to follow in. It's very easy to say that I want to deliver content to user wherever he is. But traditionally, TV broadcasting has always been on rooftop antennas, right? So your whole link budget, your RF chains have always been delivering on a 10 dB plus antenna gain. Now, how do you deliver content into a negative 7 dB antenna gain? So you need a different architecture. You need to have what we call the low power, low tower architecture. Massive SFN networks throughout the city that give you coverage area in the entire coverage area, and it give you a uniform SNR. And that's how you're able to deliver content anytime, anywhere, to any place. Those are the limited points I wanted to make up.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll probably come back to you because I looked at those, because I've listened to your presentation and I studied, and because your organization also specialized in device development and areas. So I will come back on the device and what you mentioned about the slicing, and then it's a kind of analogy that has to the physical layer pipes that we had in DVB-2 kind of a thing. So let's go to Amir, and then I'll come to you, Thomas, last but not least. Amir, the question to you is that, because at the beginning also I asked the question that there is this challenge of the broadcasters, because when we call, if I very quickly tell the broadcast, when we are talking about, especially like a television broadcast, we are talking about the broadcast through terrestrial networks, satellites, or cable, and also now in the recent times we have augmented that with what's called over-the-top services, OTT. And then we have done this very smoothly, and for that ITU has standardized some of the IBB technologies. So we have worked with the ITU-T sector, where the broadcasters, and so my question is, the Chetan also hinted this, that one of the challenges around all of this is the competition, because we have seen a kind of a rivalry all the time between the broadcasters and the telcos. But I believe in the last, I would say 5 to 7 years, they have been collaboratively working together. That's how we managed to deliver IBB. But how this whole ecosystem will change with the 5G, I mean, based on the studies that the ITU has carried out.
Thanks, Amal. So you're right. Actually, this kind of like competition is coming from the demand of spectrum. We always seen the mobile sector and the broadcast sector on the other different sides when it comes to WRCs and going towards them. But as you mentioned, recently there have been some convergences in the form of IBB technologies, in which we have now hybrid devices that are being used, like internet connected TV sets, broadcast tuners, or mobile phones with broadcast receivers as well. Um, Actually, going forward, what I think, there is a win-win scenario in if both the broadcast and the mobile sectors, they work together. uh, as Prag mentioned, that one of the issue that the mobile sector has been having, even in the 4G, is how to offload data. They have been using the Wi-Fi offloading, but especially with COVID and the new kind of like packages that have been coming, in which they are giving free access to YouTube or all other streaming sites, the data networks are kind of choking. So the broadcast, using 5G, it provides a kind of a solution to the mobile industry and incentive, to get on and along and have their network resources planned in a more efficient way, rather than on just one service that they are delivering. On the other hand, for the broadcast industry, there are different potentials. Like the 5G network, they become another delivery platform for advanced services, and it can also help in, for example, like AR and VR type of content, consolidation of services, and they could have a video library which could be accessed in a more interactive way. So it's a win-win situation going forward, if they both the services, but remaining on their own strengths, and combining the network delivery platform. And indeed, going forward, I think there are some more innovative service that both can, by joining forces, can bring in. For example, like some have been mentioned, like live casting, but other upcoming, like vehicle casting, in which the software updates could be broadcasted to the and monitoring and evaluation could be done through broadcast channels. Software updates, venue casting has been mentioned, but some of the other niche markets that are coming, like esports, in which group gaming could be done using multicast, and also the broadcasting of the players who have been gaming. And there have been interesting developments in terms of e-commerce, in which you might have seen in different platforms, the live e-commerce is getting very popular. So these are potential applications which can only be made possible if both of them can combine, and in a form of a broadcast on a different channel in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for connecting that one, and then also sharing some of the intelligence, some of the knowledge that the ITU has through your studies and so on. So last but not least, coming to you, Thomas, I'd like to ask about, because when I read your bio, something stuck immediately was that that you have contributed to the that broadband commission reports, and then even recently ITU talked about this, and I researched, and then I found in 2020, late 2020, they have also now started working on this area where ITU has been having many activities in recent times about what's called the bridging the connectivity gap. And so when we are talking about the connectivity gap, there is one related to the broadband, but especially like organization like AIBD, because recently we participated in one of the preparatory group for WTDC. That's the ITU D 4-year cycle conference that to be held in November in Ethiopia. So we made some contribution to that one, where we talk about like the challenges and then the broadcast happening. So how do you see? So let's say I mean also mentioned that the MNOs are competing to get the spectrum. So will that lead to bridging the gap, or will that probably lead to widening the gap? Because will that be more affordable? And then if 5G could help in the broadcasting again, connecting to the very beginning question, will that be more affordable? Because will that be more affordable? Because that's a question even Chetan asked. The business models are yet to evolve. Darko also mentioned it in his presentation. So what would you like to present in that area? It's a very broad question, challenging question, but I have read a number of your discussion, and I thought you still should be able to handle that diplomatically.
Thank you very much, Amal. Thank you very much for your trust and me being able to handle this broad question. And actually, it's been a pleasure to contribute over the last year to also to ITU's work, especially in a COVID-19 context. And that's very interesting to have to hear Chetan talking about like issues even in the US, with connectivity. And then we look around the world, and it's exactly you're placing the question right. We still have a huge problems of digital divide. We're talking about 5G, about new technologies, about immersive experiences, about stadium casting, when 49% of the people around the world are still not connected to anything, and then, when penetration of internet, basic internet, around the world in LDCs, in least developed countries, is only around 19%. And if we look in a kind of more stronger, like more fundamental infrastructure, like fiber, and we I think I agree around this panel, without fiber, it's very difficult to deploy meaningful 5G. Then in sub-Saharan Africa, only 0.6% of people have access to fiber networks. So when we talk about these new technologies, we at the same time talk about, we need to have a context, and even in Asia, so when we look about 5G development, yes, we have as leading Asian nations, like that really pushing hard on it, like Korea, China, specifically, but then we have a huge, long tail as well, where it would be more difficult to achieve that. And that's why it's not surprising that, in a way, sometimes we like to talk about these very fancy cases, like immersive experiences, like much more, ultra low latency applications. But the fact is, and that's the thing Darko also mentioned, in many cases, the most viable current application for 5G is fixed wireless access networks, So, and that's what is used and now being deployed in quite a few countries, from South Africa to Italy. And then because we need to plug that gap, and because this, there is a need there, So then the other question is whether there is other cases. And it's interesting, again, we all talk as experts about what are the potential cases. However, when you look at the statistics, and like the recent McKinsey study says, the biggest challenge for operators today for 5G deployment is business case. And 60% of operators say that's the biggest problem, And it's interesting, 60% is only because in North America, the study says 11% operators. So they're pretty confident they will do it. But in Europe, it's 100% of operators apparently say business case is a problem. In Asia, about 67%. It's even more interesting that even though around 60% of operators have technology deployment plans, only around less than 40% of them have a business case for it, and less than 17% have a commercial strategy. So the question is there, I think it's one of those 5G, and that's kind of the interesting point is one of those build and they will come deployments now. So everyone is kind of pushing a lot on 5G. Governments are pushing, operators are pushing, we all are looking for business cases. But in practices, and I think that's a bit of a scary thought, that all these things, a lot of those things we discuss are theory, so we want that to happen. We want this ultra low latency applications to come. We want this, Chetan was, looking autonomous vehicles to come, and all other things, but are they here, So I think that is the one big question with 5G, which we'll have to see. Another question is about how, when it comes, how evenly it will be distributed. So we know that biggest 5G application, if we really want to talk about real 5G, like super high bandwidth, low latency, we talk about also deployment of microwave, bands, 26, 28 gigahertz. What is the coverage area of 26, 28 gigahertz? So that's around 100 meters. So when you look at the Verizon in the US, coverage is, let's say, very good way it works, but it doesn't work very everywhere, So that's, and then when we talk about deployment again in developing country context, then it's again even bigger challenge. So I think this is so I'm not saying that it's a technology that's not having its applications, definitely will. And I think one big thing with 5G, it really encourages the thinking how to invent these new business cases, how to push the boundary, how to kind of find new applications. But at the same time, I think we need to be realistic that it is, and I think it was also mentioned by Darko very well, is part of the mix, so we can't just say 5G will solve it. 4G actually still has a lot of applications, and actually as a basic kind of load for internet, it has a lot of great ways to extend the internet. 3G is now fading, so 3G is kind of, let's say, technology that will be switching off, and we'll see a lot of operators making those announcements, but not necessarily 4G, with 5G coming in as an overlay, and still investment, in the fixed networks is also needed. So it's the in the fiber. So the last bit is, so what I see from my perspective, not being broadcasting expert, what that makes for broadcasting. So first, I think it's like a overall further push to streaming, because as more people have more access to internet, the basic thing is, you like it or don't like OTT broadcasting concept, but that's kind of streaming, more personalized experiences, and that's where broadcasters will have to adapt probably even more. So that's where users are moving. The second is production. I think other people are more, know more than I, but about, so of course there's all fancy cases about multi-angle broadcasting and ability to collect content better. So probably that will also be a possibility, because it's also here we can talk about private networks, we can talk about installations where you actually can find the ways, like you can install 5G private network in a stadium and collect that data. So that's probably allows you to kind of go that. Third piece is just more futuristic, is also how the consumption will change. And that's just an interesting thing. And video gaming was mentioned by Chetan, but also how video gaming, which is now a growing industry, will merge with the broadcasting as well, and how we'll merge as live events. So you see now this Fortnite becoming not only the gaming platform anymore, but like an event where, broadcast music stars are launching their video albums, and like, music albums and doing the video performances, live performances. So I think this is a consumption side. So the visibility of people just having more streaming, more personal experience, merged with the ability to collect, let's say, the content better, will, I think, just change the way we perceive how we consume the content. Not necessarily just that, in a kind of traditional broadcasting way, but also through these immersive video gaming-like experiences as well. So just some thoughts. So I think there's a lot of potential, but we also need to be realistic how fast it will come, and as I say, and how evenly it will be distributed. Thank you very much, Shama.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thomas. I could allocate one or two for each one of you to comment the other panelists what they said. If you want to highlight any point, anybody got anything? Chetan, you?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think we're all agreeing that business model is the key.
Yeah.
Generally, what has happened in the past is, and it's unlikely to change in the future, unless something changes, is the fact that that you have to worry about the antenna, you have to worry about the protocols that go in the handset, you have to worry about who's going to make what, and unless some party is willing to give up on the revenue stream that they've had in the past, it's unlikely to make compromise. So broadcast in cellular, people have tried it for more than a decade. And it's always the business model that has gotten in the way. It's not about how you marry the two mediums, but can you really make business model work? And that's going to be a thorny issue. Now, in absence of that, you do have other elements that were mentioned. I think Amir mentioned that around software broadcasting or maps downloading in vehicles or IoT. So those niche applications can be served by broadcasting. And in instances where one can have licenses to both, then you could have scenarios where it can play out with better integration. But then you get into the question of scaling of electronics. How do you scale handsets which have that capability? And whether that happens or not remains to be seen. Qualcomm has pushed broadcast with MediaFlow in the past, and is that kind of technology and that standard is making its way through 3GPP. This time, will it change or not remains to be seen. I mean, it's I think operators themselves are very focused on just making sure that they can deploy 5G and recoup investments. They're really not at this point worried about broadcasting, or as long as they can fill the pipes with content and consumers are willing to pay for it, it works for them. That doesn't mean that there will be some disruption that can happen through, say, some internet player that takes a different tack at it and changes the game. It can happen, but business model is the biggest thorny problem.
Yeah, no, surely, because as you mentioned earlier, when the three curves collided, we do see at this moment the AI and the other technological developments. You gave a sort of an example, taking the Uber and how it disrupted the taxi industry. It could happen. So, in fact, I was going to ask that as the last question later, but let's ask Parag, you want to quickly comment on the device side? Because like Chetan mentioned, we had great technologies like MediaFlow from US, the DVB-H, again, another great mobile broadcasting technology. And then for a short time in this versatile ISDB-T mobile broadcasting, TMM, they did not sustain. So what do you think about trying to broadcast to the mobile device? Can you, in a short time, elaborate a little bit on that?
That is true. I think Chetan mentioned parts of it. It's one reason why they didn't succeed was a business model. Nobody agreed on the business models, and you wanted to have a separate out-of-band pipe. The thing is, as long as broadcast is a silo and it's not part of the overall toolkit, this is going to be a problem. Of course, there are regulatory issues on licenses and all of that. The other reason why MediaFlow and DVB-H didn't succeed as much as they should have is like I mentioned, a technology issue as well, right? It's not just purely business. It's because how do you deliver content to a negative gain embedded antenna? So on the transmit side, you have to have a very different set of architectures. And this was not possible to do, it was not possible to do deep packet inspection and offload maybe a decade ago. Now with, semiconductors, now video being a major, or rather the broadcast bit, I think I would like to classify this maps and software download as, as a broadcast bit. As these broadcast bits start to proliferate, people will see value, and also largely because of the siloed natures of both broadcast and broadband, nobody is cast an argument in terms of the economics to an operator, right? So how much cost does he save if he rolls out a broadcast network for an equivalent broadband network? So those are the arguments that need to be cast, and I think it's a matter of time. It's eventually people will see it, and it's an idea I think whose time has come, because I don't think this whole thing about fattening the pipe is a smart move. You have to go to smarter pipes. There are simpler ways, better ways to achieve ubiquitous connectivity. I think I like Thomas's point on this digital divide, right? The disparity between different parts of the world, and broadcast to a large extent in terms of education, in terms of a lot of other, gives you a very cheap alternative to bridge this gap. And I think in the next 2-3 years, I think you'll see a lot of activities. I think we are also at the forefront of it, trying to push the technology part. And you mentioned the important part on the device side, right? The device ecosystem also has to be available. But now it isn't such a big deal because we have built a phone. I think you would have seen we have built a phone with an embedded antenna and with our device inside inside a smartphone, inside an Android smartphone. It's very easy to build it. It's the question is there a service, and what is the service that actually enables that? And once the service is in place through regulations, through business models, you will have broadcast proliferated literally every phone. It's somewhat like Wi-Fi was in say 2003 and 2004, right? Wi-Fi was just entering the phone, and then Wi-Fi got its own icon on the phone, right? You got this Wi-Fi icon. I believe this idea I'm stealing from Shashi Shekhar, who is the CEO of Prasar Bharati. He says, we should also brand broadcast in a similar manner. You should have a broadcast icon and proliferate it and message it around like that. The problem is we are not messaging it properly, right? As an integrative part. We just want to be an exclusive club. That happens, we are in for some good times ahead.
Yeah. So before we come to the end of it, I would like to take a few questions from the participants. So one of the questions they're asking is, I think we did not touch at all about the security. Anyone would like to comment on that? Is there an additional challenge in 5G with respect to security, or?
Well, in 5G or in broadcasting?
Yeah, sure. It's when it's related to the because even we are looking at the broadcast within 5G, so it's the main focus will be 5G. Yeah, so it's around 5G. Anyone want to comment?
I think there are challenges, but I think they're being addressed because in 5G, from an implementation perspective, a whole telco cloud is shifting from appliances. The whole telco network is shifting from an appliance-based model to a cloud-based model. And once you start to go to a cloud-based model with virtualization and a lot of components running in software, all the issues that you have in an IT network now get transplanted to a telco network as well. There are issues, but there are also solutions to it. With every new technology come in new issues on security, but there are also ways and means to solve that. And there's an opportunity for that.
Yeah. I think both Thomas and Amir would like to comment. So let's. Can I give Thomas first, and then come to you, Amir? Yeah, thank you.
No, just second Parag saying that actually I don't think these are 5G specific. These are also technology change specific. So for example, we have a move to Open RAN now. So that means it's integrating a bit of a, what was an integrated, let's say equipment stack, So of course you have more opportunities, for let's say failures, but at the same time you have new technologies that ensure that, integration is there and good practices is there and software packages is there. So I think, cybersecurity is like a rising issue anyway, so it will be a rising issue, both because of we just kind of more dependent on that, just more devices connected. There's more, the technology stack is more complicated, but I think it's not 5G specific. It's just something that we'll have to be resolving anyway. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes, Amir, please go ahead. Yeah.
I do agree with both. First, we cannot have a foolproof system. That expectation, I think, is not true. But if you see the ecosystem and the model of the 5G, the security is inherent in infrastructure, in devices, and in the services. So when you build up a network with such a security inherent in the different, communicating devices, then you can have a little more confidence on having security than its predecessors. Just I wanted to have a little more touch on what Thomas mentioned about some business cases. In the Chetan's presentation, you also saw that there is also it could be considered as a business case in the sense that 5G is the OPEX required for 5G is lower than the 4G, and the number of bits that it can put in the same spectrum, it's much higher than its predecessor. So if your spectrums are choked up or your networks are getting choked up, the only option is either to have more sites or get more spectrum. And on the supply side, if both spectrum and having more sites is difficult, then there is a question for the operators whether why not go to the next technology, and you have to go in if not now, in 2-3 years due to competition, you already have to shift. So this thinking also coming in the minds of the telcos as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Darko, would you like to comment on the cyber security, because it's mainly due to the cyber connection that the security become an issue, because it has more vulnerabilities. But maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, could you mention about like some of the things that you have been, the EBU has been doing, number of the recommendation that you publish around cybersecurity?
Yes, so I could comment on that, although that's really not my expertise. But the EBU indeed does have an activity around cybersecurity. So it is an issue for the broadcasters, I think, in several ways. One way is the content protection. So we have content protection standards, if you like, mechanisms that ensure that the content can safely be delivered to the end user. The other important element or aspect of cybersecurity is the protection of the production infrastructure. And we have seen some high-profile examples where actually the production and archives of major broadcasters have been exposed to cyber attacks with really devastating consequences. So I think this is one of the major concerns. If your operation depends on having your IT infrastructure, your production infrastructure up and running 24/7, any disruption there is a big issue. So the EBU has published some recommendations. We have an active group of experts that is developing guidelines and best practices, but we are not developing specific technologies there. We need to rely on technologies being developed by the technology developing bodies, such as 3GPP, such as perhaps others, depending on the specific layer of a protocol stack or whatever. We are looking mainly into how to implement them in our own context, but it is a significant issue indeed.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. So this could probably be the last question, which directed at all the panelists. This came from one of the participants and asking about I'll read the question. Hi, I'm from news department. How 5G can play a role in conveying, broadcasting the news, as most of us still relying on 4G, and of course, other option of medium such as Facebook and the WhatsApp. I think it will be quite a straightforward answer. We would like to, okay, I'll give it to Thomas. Yeah, please go ahead.
So I'll use the opportunity to broaden this also, Mal. So I think in a way, we always like to talk about end user applications because that's kind of the most visual way. And when the question implies is how specifically would help for someone, so I would say, in many ways, it's just in a very basic way, higher capacity, more data can be transmitted, and so most probably faster communication, more information, It's like, so it's interesting how the telecoms industry also goes through these cycles. So when we talk about 3G, we also always focus on the common use application. This video call was supposed to be the skill application, which never took off, With 4G, we just became realistic. It's just a mobile with higher broadband, So the thing with 5G for me, in many ways, it's even higher throughput broadband, one, and second is ability to connect way more things, So I think that will also come. But I think the end user applications, I think sometimes distracts from actual technology abilities, which is just to create that platform for more data to be transmitted and more things to be connected. And I think in this way, what we're discussing today will allow these new applications, which some of them won't know, but also it will take time to allow these applications. Just because people can use something, they don't necessarily would. And somewhat like Parag mentioned about mobile video, for example, and we had this very high profile, let's say, failure of Quibi, which was supposed to be this mobile video, video kind of giant, backed by really big industry names, and people didn't pick up on it, So I think that's and probably that would be my closing thing. 5G will have impact, but probably in a much more basic level, than sometimes we want to think about that, both in terms of what it provides, but also where it provides and how it complements other technologies, which are not to disappear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the AIBD wants to take a group photo. So I'll ask Nabil to take the floor and give the appropriate instruction what needs to be done. Are you there, Nabil? Yeah, okay.
Just a moment, please.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Right, let me just make spotlight everyone. All right. All right. So 1, 2, 3. Let me just check. Perfect. First click. Perfect. Thank you. Over to you,
Right.
Dr. Amar.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's close to 2 hours now, and we probably need to start slowly winding up. But I will go right around the panel. Only one sentence. What is the message that you would give it to all the participants today as a kind of a take-home message from your presentation or your discussion? Starting from Darko.
Thank you, Amal. So my message is that for broadcasters and for the media industry, 5G provides an opportunity, but that opportunity will materialize under the right conditions. So the industry needs to stay engaged in the developments, and it will develop not only on the technology capabilities, but also on business models that are yet to be found, on regulation, and on collaboration with across the value chain. Thank you.
Thank you. How about Amir next?
Yeah. If you see the 5G deployment costs, they are pretty high. The capex is very high. So there is a need for both the broadcast and the mobile industry to work together to have a kind of a converged infrastructure usage so that these costs could be brought down, especially in cases where there has been impact of COVID. They would be very difficult and challenging for the operators to build in such a high cost network.
Right. Thank you. How about you, Thomas?
So 5G is definitely coming and providing new opportunities. However, it's a mixed, or it's a good added mix, addition to the mix of other technologies, and not like something new that will replace everything. And I think in a way, how it will change actually our landscape is still a lot of questions unanswered. And for the moment, what we know is much more answers. The real answers is much more basic than some futuristic expectations we sometimes have.
Yeah. Thank you. How about you, Chetan? What is your sort of a key message that you would like to share?
So if you study the past cycles, it's clear that roughly 2 to 3 years time passes when the disruptions become obvious. Until then, everybody's kind of looking at, maybe something will come or there's capabilities available. And the companies that succeed are the ones who are tinkering around with the new tools right at the get-go. If you wait for somebody to bring an application or a business model to you, it's already too late, and you will not really participate. It's unlikely to participate in that cycle. And so I will just encourage everybody to keep an open mind and start figuring out how to use these new tools, and don't try to fit your existing business models to those tools.
Thank you, Thomas. I think with that, I would like to hand over the floor to the director of AIBD, Ms. Phenomena. But before I do that, let me thank all the panelists. And then I'd like to summarize what you said. What basically you said was 5G has enormous potential, and it enables various vertical industries, and probably like the broadcasting industry mentioned. So we need to work with 3GPP to gain some of those benefits in the coming years, and that's what we want from AIBD side, where we have the great affiliation to the broadcast industry. So with that, I hand over back to you, Philo, the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Amal. And yeah, so thank you to everybody here who shared, different perspectives. And this has been interesting. And like Chetan pointed out, we should be ready to embrace something new and not wait for a specific time to try out a new marketing or new kind of content solutions, because new tools are always effective and are always open for everybody to use and to make it better, right? So I think with that kind of insight and foresight that has been shared today, I would like to thank all of you, Thomas, Amir, Chetan, Pranag, right? And also Darko, all the way from EBU. I know it's 7:30 in the morning. It's so early for you guys, and Chetan's bedtime almost. So thank you so much to everybody who have joined us. We see a lot of people who have joined us today from Malaysia as well. So I'd like to thank, and perhaps one day we might be looking at hosting a 5G conference in Malaysia or in any part of Asia Pacific. So we're definitely looking at this eminent panelists here today. Thank you so much, everybody. And let's embrace the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you all. Yeah, thanks.